because as I mentioned, tonight we want to start reviewing the insight knowledges, because this is really sort of at the heart of vipassana, or the development of insight. And it follows on with the four foundations of mindfulness, and then in developing the 7 factors of enlightenment that we went over in the last few weeks. It's these insight knowledges that are what are essentially being cultivated as the culmination of all the previous practice. So when we're practicing the 4 foundations of mindfulness, contemplating, developing mindfulness of breathing, contemplating the body as just being, billions of cells, molecules, and atoms that are constantly changing, and then going on to observe the painful and pleasant feelings. We get familiar with these aggregates and how they're constantly kind of changing. And then when you get into the contemplation of Dhamma, then that kind of, by the time you've contemplated the body, feelings, and mind states, at the same time you're gaining concentration. And so by that time, with that increased concentration and weakening the hindrances, when it gets time to contemplating the Dhamma, that means the 5 aggregates, the 6-fold sense sphere, and then you're developing the factors of enlightenment and contemplating the 4 noble truths. And so in that progress, development, you are gradually developing the powers of mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom. And then these insight knowledges are sort of like the culmination of that. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't get to that level because perhaps they don't spend enough time cultivating in the practice of meditation, and also going on retreats and being able to develop a deeper level of awareness. But nevertheless, these insight knowledges, they do arise, some aspects of them in your practice. But now these insight knowledges, this first insight knowledge, or the 8 insight knowledges actually belong to the knowledge and vision of the way, which is the 6th stage of the 7 purifications. And I know, the Theravada tradition is being notorious for having, lists of different mental qualities. And in this case as well, the 7 factors of enlightenment, the 7 stages of purification, the 8 insight knowledges, these are all tied together. I mean, intellectually it sounds difficult, but actually they're all, tied together and intimately connected when one cultivates a systematic practice. Anyway, so these, the knowledge and vision of the way, this follows something which is called the 5th purification of what is the path and what is not the path. So a lot of people, when they meditate, they hear about practicing concentration and gaining jhanas, and then they hear about just, practicing mindfulness, and people say, oh, you don't need concentration, you can just go directly to practice vipassana, because, you hear a lot of these different opinions about what is the correct practice. And some teachers say, oh, you have to attain all the jhanas really before you can effectively practice the vipassana. And other teachers will say, no, you don't really have to, gain jhana at all to practice the vipassana. And and then people, when they practice the jhanas, they get fascinated by the side effects of jhana, like seeing inner light in the mind, or getting intense joy and tranquility, and they think that is that's enlightenment or something, or that is insight. So they get distracted, and they want to just hang out in those jhanic states. So that is why this discerning what is the path and what is not the path is an important stage of understanding, that just attaining jhanas and experiencing, inner lights, or, lightness, and is a piti and sukha, inner joy, and maybe some other powers might come. You think you can read somebody's mind, or maybe you recall a past life, and wow. So people can get distracted. So that is not the path of the vipassana. That can become a hang-up, a distraction. So therefore, understanding that, to understand that vipassana is the true method for gaining liberation. But it doesn't mean to say concentration isn't necessary, but it means not getting trapped in the jhanas and just not going on to develop insight, which happens to a lot of people. So the knowledge and vision of the way is, once you've determined that the samatha and vipassana is the way to liberating the mind especially from the ego, then that is part of it. And so this first insight knowledge, the knowledge of rise and fall, is specifically tuning in to impermanence. So it's also called the perception of impermanence. So the first insight knowledge is that all the five aggregates are continually changing, and they arise and vanish very quickly. And so that's why being able to discern rise and fall means seeing how quickly, like a sensation of the breathing just arises and vanishes, or the perception of the breathing arises and vanishes, followed by another one and another one and another one. Or the six senses, each moment of hearing, seeing, tasting, smelling, touching, and thinking is one moment of sense perception that arises very quickly, but then vanishes very quickly too, even instantaneously. But normally the mind doesn't see that impermanence because of the clinging, of the mind's clinging and identification. It only sees the continuity. So without seeing the impermanence, we take things to be permanent. That means we take our consciousness to be permanent. And we take our sense of self and I to be permanent. Especially those two aspects of it. We take our consciousness to be permanent. And because we take the consciousness to be permanent, we think that's my soul, or that's myself. It's going to be permanent and eternal. And so it's the developing the perception of impermanence that helps to break through the perception of permanence, or it breaks up the continuity of consciousness to see how consciousness is actually just different moments of hearing, seeing, tasting, smelling, touching, and thinking that are rising and passing away, faster than a computer processes information. Or the analogy that I've often given is that our consciousness has the same kind of makeup as a reel of film, the old-fashioned, movie rolls of film, whereas each frame of the film is a still photo, but there's a space in between, followed by another photo and another photo. So to make up a film, there might be thousands of individual frames, which are separated, but when they're run through a projector and the light thrown on them, you don't see the breakup of it. It looks like one flowing scene, and therefore you get really interested in it, and you get, start taking sides, the Cowboys or the Indians or this cricket team or that cricket team or the World Cup, taking a current example, right? And so we get attached. So this scheme, this practice of developing the insight, and especially developing the insight into rise and fall, breaks up that continuity of the consciousness. And therefore it also breaks up the sense of our self being this consciousness being a continuous flowing phenomena that then, and I am the doer or the experiencer. So that's why the insight, this insight into rise and fall is considered the first step of what you would consider a deeper insight. I mean, we can get some kind of, kind of intellectual understanding and seeing how quickly things change in the mind. We can say, yeah, things are impermanent, but, it's still on a kind of a not a very deep level. It's only on a reflective level. But when you develop the insight knowledge of rise and fall, this becomes the bhavana, Maya Panya. And so you specifically have to tune into it, just as you would tune a radio dial to a specific radio. Maybe you want to listen to a specific kind of music, like country and western. So you have to dial that radio dial to that particular channel that's only going to be playing country and western. Or if you want something else, all these different stations give a different kind of music. So the same way, tuning into rise and fall is basically diametrically opposed to concentration. In other words, trying to fix your mind to one point. So you cannot practice vipassana if you just hold your attention on one point, and that you don't you become oblivious to the coming and goings of the other sensory stimulations. But the concentration and focusing on one point can be good up to a level of gaining the jhana. But you don't get stuck in the jhana. You then turn that attention to the other senses, where the mind is in the present moment, and you open up to the flow of any of the five aggregates, any of the six sense impingements, and seeing how quickly they come and go. But it's a specific training not to get attached to the marks of any object. And so it takes a great deal of concentration to do that. But the breathing is the first training. So you tune into how quickly the in-breath arises and stops. It begins and an end. So rise and fall basically means the beginning and ending. It's just a term that's been coined by some teachers, rise and fall, but actually it's noticing the beginning and ending of each sensory vibration, and not to cling on to the previous one, keeping the mind open, because there's always something else coming through. So you feel an in-breath, but at the same time, you might feel sensation on your face or your arm, or a touch of clothing in the background, or hear a sound. And it's developing momentary concentration. Now, this is the point. Actually, we're still developing concentration in Vipassana, but we call it momentary concentration, or Khanika Samadhi, because there's basically three types of concentration mentioned. The popular one is the full absorbed concentration, but that's not the only kind of concentration. There's momentary concentration and there's the access concentration. But the big one is the, jhanas, and everybody gets all excited about the jhanas and so on. But and that's okay. But again, if you just are doing the meditation, just stay in the jhanas and so on, that can get you sidetracked. So the momentary concentration is what is most important for developing in the Vipassana method. And it's called momentary concentration because you just notice things from moment to moment, not try to keep your attention on one thing all the time, but you open up the attention a little bit. That's why in all my guided meditations, I always suggest people to try to feel the outline of the body. To rest the attention behind the eyes and feel the outline of the body. Because when you're feeling the outline of the body, and when you can hold that long enough, then anything that moves within that outline of the body, the awareness picks it up. It's like having a radar, blip on a radar screen. And, the in-breath might be there, but there's something, all over the body, there's sensations. The pulse of blood, the heart beating, so many little prickly sensations. And the more that you can notice, the better. And so you speed up the rate of perception to notice more and more things coming and going. And in between feeling the body, you hear a sound. If there's sounds in your house or so on, somebody slams the door, the cat meows, the dog barks, something else. It just arises and vanishes. And if you don't think about it, the trouble is we go on thinking about these things that come up, that arise. And the thinking is what then keeps our mind on that particular sensation, thought, or sound. And then we don't see the other things that are there coming and going. So it's a very deliberate practice of keeping it. That's why developing that awareness of the posture of the outline of the body is the most valuable for practicing the Vipassana. Because when you're feeling the whole body, you feel something on your forehead, you feel something on your toe, you feel something on your right arm and left arm, and all points in between. And you don't look for them. You just, they just arise like, if you've ever been in a dark stadium where people are taking flash bulbs, right? You don't have to look for each flash bulb. You just see these hundreds and hundreds of flash bulbs, people taking pictures, in a dark area. You don't have to look for them. They're just appearing on their own because they're within the range of the senses. So the same way, in the perception of impermanence, discerning the rise and fall, you can see that very clearly, and you purposely not follow one that arises and vanishes, and it's followed by another, and that momentum builds up. You have to let that momentum of rise and fall build up, because then you start gaining insight. It's only because of clinging to an object that it appears to be something solid and lasting, but only because of the attention that we're giving to it. But it's in real nature. It's just made up of individual moments occurring in rapid succession. Now, in a movie, with the movie projector, it's a very good analogy to remember that when it's going to the projector and shining light, it appears continuous, like a continuous sequence of activities, and those actors and so on appear to be real. But when you put it on slow motion, if you've ever been into a theater where for some reason the projector went on to slow motion, this was, back in the days when, in the 50s and 60s, when we went to movie theaters, the projector malfunctioned and it would go into slow motion and you'd see the staccato, like, that is the perception of impermanence, actually. When you reach that level where you're actually seeing that kind of, that is a very deep level of perception of impermanence. And again, most people unfortunately don't get to that level because it takes a long time of continuous sustaining the attention in developing that. But that is the first insight knowledge of rise and fall, how quickly each moment of hearing, seeing, tasting, smelling, touching, and thinking just arises, and if you don't cling to it, it vanishes, followed by something else and something else. But when you speed up the rate of, because our perception is very slow, so because it's slow because we're clinging and we're wanting to, oh, what's that flower? What's that? Oh, that's so nice. Or trying to struggle getting away from the pain. Our quickness of perception gets slowed down because of the clinging and attachment. So that's why the perception of impermanence, we deliberately try to speed up the rate of perception to see how many different things we can notice coming and going. And because doing that, the mind has no time to bring in the past or future about any of those previous objects. It's only when you're lingering on the object that we bring up and you remember in the past all the things and wanting the future. And that's what gets the mind distracted. So this perception of impermanence is a very deliberate development of attention in order to see how quickly the mind is operating in its true nature. And that is the meaning of, vipassana, actually. It means seeing things as they are. And how are they? They're impermanent. They just arise and vanish moment after moment. That's really the deeper meaning of the vipassana. And then the other aspects of suffering and no self will become apparent as you are developing this perception of impermanence. You see how suffering arises when you're clinging to the object, clinging to a specific object. You see that suffering arise. And the suffering means just, attachment, aversion, and getting distracted. So, and then you also begin to see how the sense of self arises with that clinging and attachment. When we don't see impermanence, when you see how everything comes and goes, the sense of self comes and goes with each of those moments. And that's called the mind-body process. So it's seeing how the sensory impingement, like a sound on the ear, then you see the mind rise up with identifying the sound. Oh, that's Mita meowing. And Mita, that's our cat. And then the sense of me owning Mita, or, owning whatever, your house, all that comes into the mind. But when you're seeing that rapid fire arising and vanishing, those kind of perceptions and thoughts don't get into the mind. And so a kind of an emptiness arises within the mind. So that is why that that insight knowledge of rise and fall, that first insight knowledge is really the beginning of what we call deeper vipassana. You might get some insight and you might call it vipassana by seeing things kind of more casually coming and going, okay, but this is the insight into rise and fall is really the more advanced level, and it really that's when you need that jhanic, and that is equal to jhanic level concentration, but it's the momentary kind. So it's still, the mind is in the present moment, not being distracted. And so that is equivalent to a jhanic level of concentration, although it's not the absorbed kind of jhana. It's the absorption in the present moment. The mind is totally focused in the present moment and not being distracted. So that is really the meaning of jhana, not necessarily your whole mind being lost into one particular object or so. Okay. So now the second insight knowledge is the knowledge of just falling. And so this is it follows on the knowledge of rise and fall. That means when your mind is steady on course, not being distracted by any of the hindrances. All the hindrances have to be overcome by this point. They will have been overcome if you followed and practiced the four foundations of mindfulness, as we've already gone over, and so on. So this is really the sort of the culmination of the practice. So as you're noticing things rise and fall very rapidly, it's almost like you don't even see them arising. All you see is the vanishing. It's like looking up in the sky during a meteor shower. Normally, you don't see when the meteor starts, the shooting star, right? All you see is it vanishing into space. It's gone. It's like, so it's gone. And it's called the knowledge of dissolution, seeing how things are just vanishing, vanishing, vanishing. And so that's a more, the second, deeper level of the insight. The things not even really arising, they're just vanishing. And you see, there's nothing to get held on to. But you see the joy in that. When you see how things are just vanishing, there's no, sort of stress. Although you do see, well, we'll talk about that next week. I'm not going to get into the third insight knowledge tonight, but you can read about it in the attachment that I sent out on Monday's email. You can read about the following insight knowledges, but I would like, as your homework, if you like to see it like that, in your meditation this week, if the mind gets to that point where you develop some good level of concentration, rather than just staying in that and enjoying the peace or quiet, start focusing more intently on the sensations of the breathing and how quickly the different sensations of the breath just arise and vanish. You might see just one in-breath, but there's not just one in-breath. There's a whole sequence of the lungs have to expand, right? When you're breathing in, the lungs, the rib cage expands. And it's a whole series of, cellular interactions and so on that is causing the rib cage to expand in nanosecond by nanosecond. And that's what we kind of tune into. Or at least you can see, you can see at least 2 or 3 or 4 short little in the expanding of the rib cage. It's if you're concentrating in here. If you're concentrating here, you probably won't see it. That's why I advise people to focus the attention in the center of the body, the abdomen, rib cage, and chest. And especially if you practice some deep, slow breathing, you will see that more clearly. So that's a training device, is to, if you can practice a deep, slow breathing in the beginning, you see how there's 3 or 4 or 5 or even more individual little arising and vanishing in one in-breath and also in the out-breath. These are sensations of the rib cage, expanding and contracting. And so that tunes the mind into that. And then you can apply the same thing to a sound. If you hear a sound, it's not just one sound, it's many fluctuations in that sound. Like I give the example of a bird chirping. There was at least 5 or 6 individual little sounds that arose and vanished in that short little bird chirp. Could you hear them? Okay, so we pay attention to each one of those, not the whole thing. Oh, what kind of a bird was that? No, just each one was just. And then when you feel some other, even when you look at a pain in the body, you can see how even a pain is just made up of many individual little sensations coming and going. And that's really how you develop this perception of impermanence. Okay, friends, I don't want to go on because I know this is kind of very deep, and many of you, may not be familiar with this. But it's really, it makes meditation very, very interesting. Meditation is boring if you're just, watching in-breath, out-breath, and watching your monkey mind, and, falling asleep, and, it gets boring. But when you get into developing insight, wow, it becomes very, very interesting. Like a scientist looking through a microscope and observing more and more details of whatever he's looking at under the microscope, as he turns up the power of the microscope. Okay, so now it looks like there's a couple of questions in the chat box, so we'll take a look there. Okay, let's see this first question. Okay, it looks like he's quoting, however, when continuity is disrupted by discerning the rise and fall, the characteristic of impermanence becomes apparent in its true nature. No, that's what I mentioned. When we don't see rise and fall, things appear to be continuous. Like my voice appears to be continuous right now, but each syllable is arising and vanishing. Each of those sound waves is arising and vanishing. But if I speak real fast, you don't see that. So that is what's masking the impermanence, is because you're trying to figure out what I'm saying. And so you want to listen and interpret what I'm saying. But instead, in Vipassana, we don't do that. We just listen to each of those separate syllables and see how when they're strung together, then they appear to make some kind of object. But one by itself doesn't mean anything. One, you say, what? Doesn't mean anything. But 1, 2, 3. Oh, then you understand. So that's why the perception of impermanence, we have to tune into it like that. It only becomes apparent when we tune into the rise and fall, that impermanence. So I don't know what this demagoguery statement would be. I don't understand that word demagoguery myself, but don't try to put on all these other things into it. Just see it for exactly for what it is. But unless you actually practice it, then that's when these doubts and other ideas come in, because we don't really give it the attention. But when you give it the attention, it becomes clear as pie, or clear as the clear sky. If we have developed the right view, of course. Now, there can be any skeptic can make anything of anything, but anyway. Is there a second? Oh, wait, did I miss the first one? Oh, where is the rise and fall of the 5 aggregates happening? If it is in the mind, I also hear that the mind is defined as all the mental activity together. It is, but broken up into nanoseconds. There's form, feeling, perception, volition, and consciousness. Now, I've talked about this many times. Those are the 5 aggregates, and those are arising in a moment and vanishing. But in terms of nanoseconds, like millions of those in a second, they're separate. So the form, the material vibration is the contact. Because of that, running through the nervous system, the brain awakens, and you get the feeling, and the perception arises, almost, it appears simultaneous because we don't have an electron microscope in our brain. But when you develop concentration to a high degree, it becomes like an electron microscope. And the Buddha could see that. That's how the Buddha developed these insights into the nature, how fast the mind operates. It's operating faster than a supercomputer, or 10 supercomputers combined. The human brain is operating faster. So even though the mind is defined as all those mental activity, yes, but those activities are, it's like a soup. Okay, if you have a soup that has 5 spices in it, now, and you put your tongue in that, then you can't separate the spices that have been in that soup cooking for a long time, right? But you can get an idea. Oh, there's cinnamon in there. There's pepper. And, there's nutmeg, and you can kind of get an idea that there are different spices, but you can't separate them out on your tongue and see them, right? So in the same way, these aggregates, form, feeling, perception, volition, and consciousness, or even just hearing, seeing, tasting, smelling, touching, and thinking, they are arising that fast because our perception is slow. Our normal perception is slow because of its clinging and delusion. And so that's why. And that's why, without specifically tuning the mind in, then to break up this continuity. But again, it takes a lot of practice, and it's not something that's just done casually, or it usually takes sustained meditation over a long period of time to come to that level. But at least you can get an idea that it's happening that way. If you don't see it exactly happening that way, at least you can get a very good idea that it's happening that way. Okay? So, let's see if Here's another question. When gaining that insight, is it right to enjoy it? Have feelings of joy and contentment? Or should it be pure observation, flat, with no feelings? Well, if you were listening to last week's talk about the factors of enlightenment, joy is the fourth factor of enlightenment, and the joy arises through getting these insights. And so, yes, you will feel joyful because it's like a scientist seeing new insights into his discovery of a cure for some disease. He'd be getting very happy. He's getting closer to solving the problem, right? So you would get the joy. But that joy is based on a detachment. And so it's not the kind of joy or that you would get attached to in the, let's say in the jhanas, getting attached to piti or sukha. And the joy comes from the mind not clinging to anything, and also gaining knowledge. We spend all this time meditating, and finally you start to get payoff, in terms of you're really getting insights. Wow, of course you're going to be joyful. And it's okay. That's an enlightenment factor. Because if you're not getting joy out of the meditation, you're going to give it up. So we should get the joy out of it. But the joy comes from the insight of learning something new. That's the whole basis of life. Really, this whole world has evolved. All these inventions and going on and on and on. People are, getting joyful of, inventing so many things. But that's a materialistic kind of progression. But this is a joy, understanding how the mind is created and how the suffering is caused, and the way to overcome the suffering. That's what gives the joy. You see that this is really the path to overcoming suffering. Yeah. But the pure observation is already there. But the joy is a side product. But yeah, don't. Even joy is impermanent, of course. But it's part of the jhana factor. So it could be a piti also, a form of piti. But because you're already in that level of insight, I doubt if you're going to get attached to it. Is that the end of those? Okay, let's see. Did I miss anybody? Okay, friends. Did anybody have? Well, it's already. Okay, friends, let's get comfortable in the sitting posture. Align your back and head in a straight line. Just gently close your eyes. Just feel your eyes in the socket. The eyelid stretched over the eyeball. Feel the subtle eye movement. That point behind the eyes, try to feel your head and face. Feel or imagine the skin stretched over the skull, especially your forehead. Sensation of the skin stretched over the face, the nose, cheeks. Feel the lips touching together. Keep the chin lifted up, level with the floor. Just remind yourself of sitting, sitting. Just letting go of your thoughts. Just try to follow this awareness down to the body. Keeping the eyes gently closed. Feel the shoulders. Relax the shoulders. Feel the skin, clothing touching the skin of the shoulder. Feel the right shoulder, the left shoulder. And try to feel the weight of the arms hanging from the shoulders. Where the clothing touches the skin of the arm. Just feel the different little sensations in each of these places. Feel the elbow. It's like looking down through a microscope. And feel your chest area, feel the clothing touching the skin of the chest. Take a few deep, slow breaths. Feel the clothing rubbing the skin of the stomach or chest, producing some different sensation. Take a deep, slow breath. You can feel many different sensations. Expanding, contracting. Feel the stomach area. Clothing touches the stomach. Each of those contacts of the body are recognized by the consciousness. Now feel your hands and fingers where they touch together, when they touch your leg. So many different little sensations you can notice. Feel the outline of your thumb or other finger. Each one has different sensations. Now feel where your buttocks press the seat. Try to feel the right and the left buttock. Each one has its own sensation. Now feel the way your knees are bent and the legs tucked underneath. And feel your feet. So many different little sensations on your feet, the heels and the arches and the toes. You're wearing socks, sensations touching the skin of the feet. And just remember sitting, the present moment of the body. Now let the awareness come back up to the body and rest again on the eyes. From that point on the eyes, try to feel that outline of the sitting body, all those different places that we were feeling, from the head down to the feet, make up this outline of the body. Mind, like a computer, is weaving all those different individual sensations together, giving the feeling of a whole body, sitting body. Try to hold that outline of the body in the mind's eye, the eye of awareness. Just remember sitting, sitting. Remembering the word sitting will help the mind feel that outline of the body. And then again, begin the deep, slow breathing like we did during the yoga. Try to do 3-part breathing, if you know that, starting the air in the lower lung, drawing it up to the middle, to the top of the lung, the chest. Feel that expansion. Hold the air in 2 seconds. And slowly let the air out, feeling that gradual contraction. And the last bit of air going out of the lung. And then the next in-breath. So take several more deep, slow breaths like that, cultivating this present moment awareness. Breathing in, letting go of the past and future. Breathing out, sitting here and now. Let the last bit of air go out. Breathing in, letting go of the past and future. Holding the air in. Out breath, breathing out, sitting here and now. Let's continue that mindfulness. A few more breaths. Holding that outline of the body in the mind's eye. Feeling that dynamic expanding and contracting in the middle of the body outline. Breathing in, sitting. Breathing out, sitting. And now we want to try counting our breaths from 1 to 10, try to gain a more continuous concentration on the breathing. I'll start out the counting, and you can continue that on your own. So with the next expanding in breath, mentally count to 1. With the contracting out breath, also count 1. Next in breath, 2. Out breath, 2. In 3. Out 3. Continue that counting on your own. Try to make it to 10 without the mind getting lost or going asleep. Mind gets lost and goes to sleep in between. Start your counting at 1 again. Breath by breath, moment by moment. Made it to 10 without getting lost. Discontinue the counting. Continue to observe the breathing moment by moment. Just knowing when the breath is coming in and knowing when the breath is going out. Know it by feeling the sensation, expanding and contracting sensation. If it helps you to stay awake, remembering, just make these brief mental notes. In sitting, out, sitting. Just remembering the present moment of this body, sitting and breathing. Try to feel like a scientist sitting in the laboratory, looking down to the microscope, observing an experiment. See how many separate little sensations of expanding you could notice in one in-breath. Notice the brief pause. See how many sensations you can notice. Contracting out the breath. The brief pause. In sitting. Out, sitting, developing momentary concentration, following each moment of expanding, moment of sitting, moments of contracting, moment of sitting. Over and over and over and over again. Breath by breath, moment by moment. Turn up the power of the mental microscope. Notice subtler details, sensation. Rising and falling, coming and going. Sensations of clothing rubbing against the skin as it expands and contracts. Even while observing the breathing process, feeling the outline of the body, you can notice other sensations coming and going. through that breathing awareness. Sensations on different parts of the body, your head, your feet, and clothing touching the skin. Each time you notice something different, it's its own separate arising and vanishing, rise and fall of consciousness. Be alert for the thoughts moving through the mind, trying to steal your attention away. And also notice thoughts or just mental sensation. Various thoughts just come and go. We don't follow them, they just vanish. Get stuck on a thought, feel more sensations in your body. Get stuck on any body sensation, hear some sound, arising, vanishing. Stay awake, alert, moment by moment, breath by breath, opening up to the flow of impermanent. Notice more and more different sensations, sounds, thoughts coming and going, arising and vanishing, rapid succession. There's always something coming through the sense, and keep that outline on the body. You don't have to look for anything, they naturally appear in the awareness. If you're not clinging to something, or if you're not stuck in thought. If you can detect or notice those five aggregates also, material vibration, painful, pleasant feeling, perception, mind recognizing object, will, urges, do something, likes, dislikes, mental activity, the consciousness, sense of I, me, or mine. It's there watching. It's also just coming and going with each object. Like that reel of motion picture, individual frames of a moving reel. One by themselves doesn't really mean anything when they're all threaded together with attachment and identification. It appears to be something solid flowing. What feeling or thoughts arise based on that sound contact? Sound arises, passes away. Sabbe sankhara aniccati yada panyaya pasati atanibindati dukkhi esamaggo visuddhiya. Dukkha pata ca nidukkha, bhaya pata ca nibbaya, sukha pata ca nisukha, hontu sabbe pipannino. All five aggregates are all conditioned things are impermanent. The five aggregates of the body, mind, and world. When one sees this with the eye of wisdom, the insight, knowledge, this is the path One becomes disenchanted with suffering. And this is the path to freedom. May the suffering be free from suffering. May the fear struck be free from fear. May the grieving be free from grief. In this way may all beings live with mindfulness and wisdom. Thus spoke the Buddha. I invite you to chant the word sadhu 3 times slowly. We do that chanting on a long out breath. Feel those vibrations in your body and mind. You can just listen. Just take a deep in breath. Okay, friends, now place your hands at the edge of your knees. Take one more deep breath. Stretch your head back, pull the hands on the knees to arch your spine. You lift the head up on the out breath. Press the chin to the top of the chest to stretch the neck vertebrae. Lift the head up level on an in-breath. Relax on the out-breath. Okay, friends, so that brings our evening meditation to an end, and I hope you're able to get some little inkling or insight into how quickly the different moments of sensations, thoughts, sounds continually arising and vanishing through the body and mind. And just an announcement that next Wednesday, actually I'll be going to the Bhavana Society in West Virginia for the 95th birthday kind of celebration of Bhante Rahula. His book launching. He's launching a new book. Actually, it's quite appropriate for the subject that we're talking about. It's about impermanence in plain English. That should be interesting. So that's a new book that is coming out, and Bhante Ji is going to be, signing copies of that book. That's out at Bhavana Society, so that will probably be available at some point from the bookshops. So therefore, probably I don't know what time I'll get back, but I'm going to kind of cancel next week's Wednesday evening program because I don't want to feel rushed in getting back in time. It's a long drive there and back. So next Wednesday we won't be having the practice, but I encourage you to try to, in your meditation every day, try to focus on this arising and passing away, developing this insight into impermanence if your mind gets calm enough. And then when we come back the week after that, then maybe you have some more questions about that. Okay?
Thank you.